Geeks! New Zealand is proposing to tax their farmers for their cow and sheep burps. I could barely say that with a straight face. You heard right. Nothing, not even burps, are safe from taxes. They had this idea because methane burped from livestock around the world makes up over 5% of greenhouse gases. And since there are way more cows and sheep than humans in New Zealand, they figured taxing the farmers could be a way to combat climate change. I asked you all whether you thought this was kind of nutty or kind of novel, and 73% of you said it was nuts. So in honor of Father's Day and the wisdom fathers have, I figured my dad could help us figure it out. Dad, what do you think about this idea? Okay. So cows and sheep burp this methane, and there's nothing we can do about it. It apparently, it harms the environment because of the methane that comes from it. Do you have a solution for this that wouldn't include taxing farmers?
I believe massive castration would help a lot humanity.
So one of the things that experts have proposed to address this problem is to give food to the sheep and cows that's less gassy. So instead of eating grass, they would eat seaweed. So you're kind of a gassy guy. Do you think that it would make a difference if you ate seaweed?
I read that rollades would help a lot. Let's give the sheep rollades.
We got a lot to cover today. We're going to talk about Biden's migration deal with Latin America, tension increasing between Lebanon and Israel, the latest in Ukraine, the UN human rights chief leaving her job, and John Cena's latest lovable move. Before we start though, show me some love because it means more than you know, and please hit that subscribe button below, click the notification bell, and like this video. We have a migration crisis at our southern border, and the White House has come up with a new plan. But will it work? 20 countries in the Western Hemisphere just signed a declaration called the Los Angeles Declaration on Migration and Protection to help address the migration problem. The deal did a few things. First, it made sure refugees will be better taken care of with the right health care, living conditions, and schooling. Second, it increased ways to achieve legal migration. Third, it beefed up border enforcement, but in a more humane and coordinated way. The thing that's critical with this declaration is that it's not just the US that agreed to these steps, but many of the countries in the region. So it's an oh my world approach, not an oh my America approach. The US agreed to resettle 20,000 refugees from Latin and Central America over the next 2 years, which is 3 times what it used to be. And the US will also increase the number of seasonal worker visas by over 11,000. Mexico, Spain, and Canada also agreed to allow migrants into their countries, and Costa Rica and Colombia said they would increase efforts with refugees from Venezuela. All of this is great, but there are a few hiccups. First, the numbers here are just a small fraction of the migrants who try to cross the southern border, where you literally have thousands coming per day. In fact, over 1 million migrants will likely come to the border this year. Second, it'll take at least a couple years to see the effects of this deal, and so that doesn't really address the immediate crisis we have. And finally, some of the countries where migrants are fleeing from the most, like Mexico, Guatemala, El Salvador, and Honduras, kind of boycotted this summit. So they signed the declaration, but their leaders didn't attend, and so it's not clear how seriously they take this. That matters a lot, because this declaration doesn't address the root of the migration problem, which is that people are largely fleeing from poverty, political turmoil, and violence. Bottom line is that this is a good step, and the best part about it is that this issue has been reframed to be everybody's problem, not just an American one, which is good since we can't tackle this alone. Still, there's a lot of work left to do to address this properly. What do you do when 2 people are fighting over, an apple? You split the apple, right? I mean, you wouldn't spend 10 years fighting over who gets more of the apple, because then neither of you would get to eat it. Well, Lebanon and Israel are fighting over a really expensive apple, which is a natural gas field called the Karish Field that sits off the coast of Israel and Lebanon in disputed waters. Why are they disputed waters? Because there's no official maritime border, because both countries are technically at war, and so they have no direct diplomatic exchanges on anything. But now it's looking like a real problem. Israel has sent an exploratory vessel with the British energy firm Energean to go explore this gas field, and Lebanon is pissed. Israel says the vessel is a few kilometers south of the disputed area, and that Lebanon should calm the F down. Lebanon says that until the disputed area is figured out, Israel should not do any drilling or exploring related to this field. Now, of course, Hezbollah wanted to flex its muscles and said it wouldn't be afraid to strike the ship and go to war over it. Israel and Lebanon have been in on and off negotiations over these waters for over 10 years, so this could take forever, or at least until Lebanon can figure out which of its corrupt leaders will profit the most. Nabi, I will drill the oil and I'll give you some electricity in exchange.
No, Michel. No. I'll drill the oil. I'll give you a house in South France and a villa in Tel Aviv. And an account in shekels.
I'm not saying that agreeing on a maritime border is easy, but there are formulas and rules in the UN Convention on the Law of the Sea to help. And it's not our first rodeo. In fact, when I was handling Lebanon at the White House 10 years ago, my friend, Ambassador Fred Hoff, negotiated a really good deal that the Lebanese walked away from. Now, a couple things have increased the stakes. Global energy prices have skyrocketed, and so this gas is an even bigger economic opportunity. And Lebanon's economy is in the shitter, so this gas could, if their leaders don't get their grubby hands on it, which they likely will, could make a huge difference for its people. The U.S. Senior Advisor for Energy Security, Amos Hochstein, traveled to Beirut this week to help mediate, and it looks like things might be moving forward. But I've been down this path before, and it's hard to know. The Lebanese government is under intense pressure to find some revenue somewhere, and Israel wants to start cashing in on this gas field. So perhaps this time, they'll all finally come to an agreement. Things in Ukraine have not been good this week. Russia has been focusing its military efforts in one city called Severodonetsk, which is a small industrial city in the east. It's important because if they capture it, then they basically solidify their control over the entire eastern part of Ukraine. And that could be really bad because they'll likely regroup and continue their efforts further into Ukraine. And it's not like they take this land and start treating people nicely. In Mariupol, which the Russians effectively seized a few weeks ago, citizens there are facing an outbreak of cholera and dysentery and other infectious diseases. And that's because the city and its infrastructure have been destroyed, corpses have been left uncollected, and now the water supply is infected and could kill thousands of people. Russian troops are distributing medication to their own, but not to Ukrainian citizens there, even though Russia controls the area. Russia has also been capturing some foreign soldiers. They captured 2 Brits and a Moroccan who joined the Ukrainian military years ago, but they're being treated as foreign mercenaries. So Russia has now sentenced them to death, which is likely an attempt to raise their value for future potential negotiations or prisoner swaps. Russia also just captured 2 Americans who are army vets who traveled to Ukraine to volunteer with the Ukrainian army unit, and they're the first Americans to end up as Russian prisoners of war. This is a really risky situation, because Putin will likely use this as proof that the US is becoming directly involved, and he's going to want major concessions to release them. President Biden this week announced an additional $1 billion in military aid after Ukraine's President Zelensky pleaded for more long-range weapons. I know this has been a bit of a depressing roundup, but I want to explain why the White House is providing all this military aid to Ukraine, which a lot of people say needs to be done even faster. And that's because we need Ukraine to end this. Ukraine is not going to defeat Russia, but they could succeed in stopping the war and pushing Russia back. The cost of Russia winning is too high, because not only could the war in Ukraine spread and continue, but it could send a message that aggression works. And no one is watching that more closely than China. So if we don't want to see things over there blow up too, then we need to show that this military aid is a means to an end. The UN Human Rights Chief, Michelle Bachelet, announced she would be stepping down as UN High Commissioner for Human Rights, and that she won't seek another term after it ends this September. She claims she made this decision 2 months ago, and that it was for, quote, personal reasons. She said, "I am not a young woman anymore, and after a long and rich career, I want to go back to my country, to my family." Yeah, except her statement comes a month after she took a trip to China, where she was heavily criticized for how she allowed the Chinese regime to use her in their propaganda. She's the first UN human rights chief to visit China in 17 years, since China is not exactly the model of human rights. And she was warned by multiple governments, including the US, that if she wasn't careful, the Chinese regime would use her visit to make itself look good. And that is exactly what happened. She allowed the Chinese regime to control her trip, where she went, and who she met with. She parroted their talking points by saying that China was addressing counterterrorism and radicalization issues in Xinjiang, where the Chinese regime is committing genocide against the Muslim Uyghur community. In fact, she said that China closed the mass detention facilities, which she called vocational and educational training centers, where over 1 million Uyghurs and other minorities are being held. She went so far as to praise China's, quote, tremendous achievements in alleviating poverty. She didn't once condemn China's repressive policies, and in her entire time in this role, she has never mentioned China's treatment of Tibet. The UN Human Rights Chief, folks. She ended up undoing the work of human rights defenders and the UN by allowing China to use her to whitewash their crimes and violations. So she says she's stepping down for personal reasons, which I understand, because it must be hard to look at yourself in the mirror after kowtowing to the Chinese regime. I mean, how are you going to put on your makeup? And she needs some time off to look for her spine. I asked you all if you thought she was actually leaving for personal reasons, and 100% of you said no. For undermining this role and this work so deeply, Michelle Bachelet is on my list this week. Michelle, farewell, good riddance. Don't let the door hit you on the way out. I would be lying if I told you I wasn't overly excited to put this muscly hunk on my crush list. Cena traveled to Amsterdam to meet with a Ukrainian teenager who has Down syndrome, and the story of what led to this meeting is going to melt your heart. This teenager, Misha, and his mom, Liana, fled Mariupol after their house was destroyed. His Down syndrome makes him nonverbal, and he couldn't understand why his family had to leave. So his mom told him it was to meet his idol, John Cena. And when the trip was difficult, his mom would keep him going by reminding him that it was all in an effort to meet John Cena. I mean, moms are amazing, right? So John Cena heard about the story, so he went to go visit them in Amsterdam, where they're currently based, and make this mom's story true. He spent the afternoon with Misha playing blocks and eating cake, and he gave him a replica of a WWE championship belt. I swear, if you're not crying right now, you're not human. John Cena stole our hearts with this story, and he's actually done a lot in the charitable world and received awards for his philanthropy. So if you're feeling mushy like me and you want to do something to pay it forward, consider giving a donation to the Make-A-Wish Foundation, which Cena does a lot with and which works to fulfill the wishes of children who have critical illness. You can make it in honor of John Cena, Misha, and his amazing mom. Thanks, Geeks! Before you go, I thought I might show you that a sign for Jamal Khashoggi Way has been unveiled right in front of Saudi Arabia's embassy in Washington, D.C. This is after the Washington Post columnist the Saudi government brutally murdered in 2018. This road sign memorializes Khashoggi while sticking it to the Saudis. My kind of move. Don't forget to please like this video, click the subscribe button and the notification bell, and if you want me to talk about something, let me know over social media and I'll definitely give you a shout out. Stay fabulous, Geeks.